In 1944, the United States placed the dollar at the center of the global monetary system.
After World War II, the United States controlled most of the world's gold reserves.
As global trade expanded, the demand for US dollars spread far beyond American borders.
In London, banks quietly began accepting large deposits in US dollars. These offshore deposits would soon form what the world calls the Eurodollar market. By the early 1960s, banks in London were holding vast deposits of US dollars.
These dollars existed outside the direct control of American regulators.
Yet the currency behind this new system remained the US dollar.
Banks discovered they could lend these offshore dollars across the world.
A global network of dollar lending was beginning to take shape. By 1965, international banks were actively trading offshore dollars between each other. In New York, American banks watched as a parallel dollar market emerged overseas.
Eurodollar deposits allowed banks to lend US dollars without operating inside the United States.
By the late 1970s,
Offshore dollars were now circulating rapidly through banks across Europe.
In New York, financial institutions realized the dollar had begun operating beyond American borders.
Banks could borrow and lend dollars internationally without touching the US banking system.
These offshore dollars helped finance trade moving across oceans and continents. By 1970, the Eurodollar market had become one of the fastest-growing financial systems in the world.
In 1971, the United States ended the Bretton Woods system, and the dollar was no longer tied to gold.
the global monetary system entered a new era of floating exchange rates.
With currencies now floating, the demand for offshore dollars grew even stronger.
Banks expanded their Eurodollar lending to companies across continents. By the mid-1970s, offshore dollars had become a central engine of global finance.
By the mid-1970s, global banks were moving billions of offshore dollars every day.
London remained the beating heart of the Eurodollar market.
American banks joined the offshore dollar system through their international branches.
A worldwide network of banks was now lending and borrowing dollars beyond U.S. borders.
In 1981, Eurodollar futures were introduced in Chicago, transforming global interest rate markets. Eurodollar futures quickly became one of the most traded financial contracts in the world.
Major banks began using offshore dollars to finance global corporate expansion.
The Eurodollar market continued expanding as international lending accelerated. By the late 1980s, trillions of dollars were circulating through offshore banking channels.
The Federal Reserve increasingly monitored offshore dollar markets for signs of global risk.
By the early 1990s, offshore dollars were deeply embedded in the global banking system. International banks relied heavily on Eurodollar funding to support global lending.
Asia joined the offshore dollar network as regional banks increased their dollar borrowing. Dollar liquidity flowing through offshore markets supported rapid global economic growth.
By the end of the decade, the Eurodollar system had become a cornerstone of global finance.
At the start of the new millennium, offshore dollars were already shaping global capital flows.
International banks used the Eurodollar market to fund investments across continents.
Dollar funding had become deeply interconnected across global financial institutions.
Few realized how dependent global banks had become on offshore dollar liquidity. Then, in 2007, cracks began to appear inside the global financial system. Banks around the world suddenly struggled to secure short-term dollar funding. Interbank lending slowed as trust between global banks began to collapse.
In September 2008, Lehman Brothers collapsed, and financial markets spiraled into panic.
The offshore dollar system froze as banks rushed to secure US dollar liquidity. To stabilize the system, the Federal Reserve opened emergency dollar swap lines.
The Federal Reserve began supplying emergency dollar liquidity to central banks worldwide.
Central banks then distributed those dollars to banks struggling for funding.
Gradually, dollar liquidity returned, and global markets began to stabilize.
But the crisis revealed how dependent global finance had become on offshore dollars. The Eurodollar system had proven both powerful and dangerously fragile.
After the crisis, regulators introduced new rules to strengthen the global banking system.
Central banks continued monitoring offshore dollar markets for systemic risks.
Despite tighter regulations, the offshore dollar market continued to expand.
Trillions of dollars still flowed daily through international dollar funding networks.
Eurodollar futures remained one of the largest interest rate markets in the world.
In 2020, global markets once again rushed to secure US dollar liquidity.
The Federal Reserve reopened massive dollar swap lines with central banks.
Those swap lines helped stabilize dollar funding markets around the world.
Once again, the offshore dollar system proved essential to global financial stability.
Even today, trillions of offshore dollars continue to circulate beyond U.S. borders.
In 2023, global markets began transitioning away from the traditional Eurodollar benchmark.
New reference rates replaced older dollar benchmarks across financial markets.
Yet the offshore dollar system itself continued operating across global banks.
Trillions of dollars still move daily through international funding markets.
The dollar remains the foundation of global finance.
The Eurodollar system transformed how money moves across the global economy.
It allowed the US dollar to circulate far beyond American borders.
Banks, corporations, and governments all rely on offshore dollar funding.
In times of crisis, the world still turns to the Federal Reserve for dollar liquidity.
The dollar may belong to America, but its financial system spans the entire world.